Hello and welcome everyone. Today in this very new episode of the Data Roll Podcast, Season 2, we are going to be witnessing something new. I decided to slightly change the convention, and for the first time, I have invited someone from our Astral Forest team to actually discuss some really interesting technological advancements within this whole data and AI space. And what sparked the idea behind this episode? Well, during the Prague conference organized by Zoltán Tündik, I had the pleasure to moderate a compelling discussion around AI use cases. And funnily enough, one of the hot topics is how to apply AI on top of the data. And this is exactly what we'll be discussing today. So, my dear audience, let me introduce to you my today's guest, Kasia Kosyl, our AI and machine learning expert at Astral Forest. Kasia, do you mind a quick introduction from your side?
Hello, so I'm Kasia. Thank you for having me on the podcast. At Astral Forest, I specialize in applying machine learning and artificial intelligence to tackle the challenges of the iGaming industry. I've worked on projects from detecting gambling behavior problems, predicting player churn, developing player segmentation, game recommendation systems, and optimizing bonus strategies, and so on. But most recently, my focus has been shifted to harnessing the power of large language models, in the short LLM, to streamline data analysis and somehow enhance decision-making process within the iGaming industry. And this resulted in a product called Astral Insights Assistant, AIA in the shortcut, that I want to talk about a bit.
Okay, gladly. I'm really curious to learn a little bit more about this. But first, before we dive deep into the details, if only I can ask you to provide some background to our audience and to tell what was the context, what was the idea, and what actually triggered all these efforts to work on these large language models. Like, what's the story behind this?
So first of all, they became super popular. So we wanted to somehow catch up what's going on with that LLMs, what they are capable of. We see some nice demos regarding what LLM can be capable of in different industries like e-commerce, finances, or whatever. And I just wanted to play a little bit around it, how it could be used in iGaming. Because so far we saw that there are some tools, but they are pretty limited. Like, for example, they focus only on text-to-SQL mode, like they just translating your question to query and that's all. There are some tools that are specializing in I upload a document and LLM will analyze it for me. There are just simple chatbots like ChatGPT, Gemini. Everyone knows, everyone uses them. So we just wanted to somehow combine all of those in one chatbot that is capable of more things than just querying your file or querying your database. We wanted to somehow build a framework that is capable of doing all of that stuff in an intelligent way.
Okay, perfect. I really like the word framework because this is something that helps us to structure things. And then, because, when I think about it in a broader context, whenever, let's say, we are an LLM user, ChatGPT, for example, the most common use cases is asking about the best cheesecake recipe or how to cook something interesting, which car model to select, etc. And when we go into the business applications, okay, we have a certain history of, for example, enhancing fraud detection, enhancing churn analysis, etc. But sometimes it's techniques that were already used before. So here you're mentioning, if I understand correctly, combining the capability of the AI and the chatbot together into a framework which handles kind of everything. So if only I can ask you, what problem precisely are we solving and whose problem is that and whom are you helping with these solutions and frameworks? What is that specifically?
So basically, we are helping the end users. And by end users, I mean, for example, the stakeholders, the game operators, the game studios. So imagine that we have our data warehouse, a place that our data is stored. Imagine that we have some Confluence, some Excel files, some KPI definitions stored somewhere, and we have all of that information. We expose it to the chatbot, and the chatbot is able to work with us in a natural language way. Like we are just asking the questions, and we do not care about what the query would look like, what I should look for the specific KPI definition. So for example, let's assume that a stakeholder wants to check what was the definition of, for example, GGR in case of that bonuses strategies. And he would just ask a chatbot, and the chatbot will look for that and return the information. The other examples is like we are going to check if the player has a gambling problem. And we have already some, for example, workflow to detect this, but then we are going to look at the specific player at the specific days we want to analyze it, so we can somehow from our mind just ask the question to the chatbot, and we do not have to somehow overwhelm our business intelligence department with some little questions like check me that player, what was his behavior that and that day, but we can just check it by ourselves. So the BI team has more time to work on a more complex dashboards, reports, whatever. And it would be perfect for some kind of ad hoc scenarios when we want to somehow drill into the data just by our mind. Like we do not have to ask the BI team to add a new column to the Power BI visualization because we are not sure if that data would be important for us. We have to test it. We can just ask the chatbot to get those data, check a little bit if we want that, and then go to the BI team. Let's add this column because I think it will be important. So there are just a few examples. Can basically analyze in an ad hoc way many fields within the iGaming field, like the compliance, players retention, with everything that we have in our data warehouse without somehow overwhelming the BI team. And what's, I think, important that this can be applied to almost every areas of iGaming, whether they are only casinos, sportsbooks, lotteries. Everyone has at some point as an end user some ad hoc queries that he wants to get an answer, but you don't have to know where exactly the data that you are looking are. And the chatbot just looking it for you and prepares you the answer.
Okay, sounds cool. I'd rather say fantastic. And at the same time, you've mentioned that it helps to relieve the burden from the BI teams. But then usually if typically people from, let's say, marketing, responsible gaming or compliance, if they would need to do the reports by themselves, they would need to learn, for example, Power BI, or they would need to learn SQL language. And so at this point, it starts to become scary. So how about using this kind of tools? What is the learning curve in this context? Because for BI, the learning curve is pretty steep for people who do not have engineering background, let's say.
Yeah, so in the case of chatbots, we are just using our natural language, and the agent understands what we are just saying, writing. It understands the context within the history. So, for example, I just ask, what was the GGR yesterday? And the bot responds, okay, and how about a month ago? And the chatbot knows already that it has to ask the database a month ago, and we do not have to know the syntax for, the shifting, what was the GGR a month ago. So all the technical stuff is hidden from the end user. So it's really easy to use for the people that do not excel at SQL or Power BI. It's, I think, perfect for them. And what's also perfect, that they do not have to wait for the reports to be refreshed. For example, they can just query the database, the data that they already there, so they have some real-time insights into the database state. So I think it's kind of a game changer because they can quickly perform actions that they are going to make. They can make decisions instantly. And what's more important, it's like I've already mentioned about it, that you don't have to, as an end user, you don't have to know where the data that you want are. If they are in that table, in other table, if they are on Wiki, if they are on some other places, if they are defined in the Power BI report, you don't have to worry about that. You just ask the chat and it will provide you an answer.
This is really interesting because usually, for example, when operators are processing audits or ISO certification or any other compliance topics, let's say that this is an activity which is regular, we could assume yearly. The question is, hey, where are these documents that treat about data processing? Where are all those rules that we defined for information protection, etc.? And then do you mean that at the same time we could have one place, one interface where we could, on one hand, interrogate and request information from the data warehouse, from the systems, from the CRM, etc., about the players. But if I say, ask, hey, but what are actually our typical rules for handling early detection of problematic gamblers, and but not only detection, but also what is the workflow of actions? And let's suppose this is a PDF file that we defined, it was approved by the regulator, and we stored it in our knowledge base. So do I understand correctly that actually it's a so-called one-stop shop, that you just go and ask and it can go look into the knowledge base, or if not, there go somewhere else? How does it work? Because this is, I'm curious.
Yeah, so I think this is the one of the most important prerequisites for that AIA to work, to build a proper knowledge base, like to allow LLM to see all of those stuff. So firstly, we will have to anyway prepare our knowledge base and then use it. And once we have that perfect knowledge base, we are having a nice way of interacting with all of those documents, and we do not care where they are. So yes, we can, for example, upload a PDF, upload some table definitions in the data warehouse, and when we want to ask about, for example, the workflow, what to do with the player that has a gambling problem, it will just look for that PDF and prepare the answer for us.
Okay, and also one of the questions that get pretty often asked in the classic BI, let's say, imagine you have 3 different reports and each of them was built at a different point in time. One of them was built 2 years ago, the second was built 1 year ago, and the third one was built 3 months ago. Each of them was built by another person. Each of them has calculations on GGR and new depositors, first-time depositors. Each of them shows different numbers. And then people start asking the questions, hey, but actually, which one is right? How is it calculated, actually? And then, for example, in some of the reports, we can put a glossary at the end of the page, etc. How do you handle such cases within the chatbot?
So far, we are focused on working with the data warehouse and not the definition of the Power BI report. But once we had a definition of the Power BI report, we had the metrics definition. The LLM understands the metric definitions and can provide those 3 different metrics. So you will decide which one sounds the best. Although you have the one gold definition of the first-time deposit players somewhere in your wiki, and the LLM knows because there is a mention that this is the gold definition.
Okay, so you have a wiki page or knowledge base where you define, hey, FTDs or GGR should be calculated like this and that. And then, for example, if it appears in several reports, you have both the numbers from the report, or you could have the numbers that are calculated from the data warehouse based on the definition that has been validated and approved. So this would actually help to identify the exact number and answer the question or not.
Yes, another example came to my mind, that a regulator finds some inconsistencies, and we have to explain that inconsistencies. So once we have in our data warehouse the data from that we are going to report to the regulator and the data from our system, we can compare those two, check how they were calculated. So it will be also easy to debug such potential inconsistencies for a person that does not need to know SQL. We just need to have the data in our data warehouse. And once we have a nicely trained LLM model, we can perform such an investigation without knowing of SQL. We just see, okay, so there was the issue on that day with that player, with that transaction.
Wow, okay, so this is pretty impressive. especially in the context of the regulated markets. Whenever you get any inquiries, sometimes you may even bypass the BI team in providing the answers.
Yes, I think that's one of the most typical ad hoc queries. The regulator found some inconsistencies and we have to check it immediately.
Okay, great. And I happen to know that you have already been working on such implementation for one of the online casino operators. Do you mind sharing some lessons learned during this first implementation? What are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, so firstly, we try to use an LLM instance that is on the local computer. Like it's not on the cloud, it's not on Azure, GCP, or Amazon. We just used a local instance of LLM, and it turns out that it was capable of handling simple tasks, but the machine did not have enough compute power to just put it into simple words to perform more complicated operations. So once we get transitioned to the cloud-based LLM, like for example in Azure, the quality of the responses of the LLM dramatically grows up. So that was the most important lesson that I learned. But also, I think that it's quite important to say that people say quality in, quality out. It's also garbage in, garbage out. So once our knowledge base is not perfect enough, it's not detailed enough, we often met some situations where an LLM does not know about something. For example, that we want to always exclude test accounts from every query, except that questions where we explicitly ask for. So it is good to add to that knowledge base some kind of a warning, exclude test accounts every time, other if user does not ask for that explicitly. So this was the second lesson, I guess. And what I also noticed that SQL is not enough. I mean, we can feed the knowledge base with some definitions, some questions, some select statements, and so on. But describing the relations between the data also dramatically improved the way that the chatbot behaves. So describing it in a natural language helps the chatbot to craft a good SQL queries. And the last lesson, I think it's quite obvious that working with the casino team was very, I would say it was a fruitful collaboration because I wouldn't thought of all of that nuanced questions that they asked, that the specific verbing or specific shortcuts that they had in their mind. Also, we have to teach them how to understand that context. So I guess that was that most valuable lessons from that prototype.
Okay, so on one side, you mentioned the vocabulary, which needs to be taught to the model, and then again, all the definitions. That is just not enough to tell him, hey, there's the data is there, go and find it, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. The when you just ask typical chatbot from the internet, what's the GGR? There are many abbreviations for the GGR. So it has to know that here's the context, for example, of the casino, and the chatbot knows that the definition of GGR is that and that. So just providing the context is very crucial for a good work for such an agent.
Yeah, right. And by the way, I'm sure you've heard many times about the hallucination and how, well, even about this cheesecake recipe, it could tell you something which is completely like irrelevant sometimes. And at least from my experience, what I saw, you could have many times a reliable answer, and then somehow at random, you get something that makes totally zero sense. And how to actually build this tool and framework, knowing in mind that you need to somehow incorporate some way of handling this kind of hallucination, because at the end of the day, if you have Mark from the marketing team, they will never know how Mark should know that, hey, this time the game stickiness report has been shown, like the top 10 games have been shown correctly or not. Yeah. So how to actually address this topic of reliability, which is something that everybody asks loud.
Yeah, so the hallucination is somehow a nature of an LLM that we want to somehow control, because the LLM just generates the most probable answer and we have to craft what is the most probable answer. And one of the way is just not tell one LLM instance that do all the analysis and respond me. We have to break all the flow to the simpler, smaller tasks, so the LLM is focused on one thing and it is going to deliver. Like, for example, we asked the LLM, should I run an SQL query? Should I interpret those numbers? Should I answer to some other question because it is not related to the chat history? So we just breaking down the tasks to a smaller ones, so the LLM is more focused. So this is one way to handling that hallucinations. Also providing a relevant context. And that's why we need that knowledge base that I'm talking about all the time. But we have that huge knowledge base, but it's also important to get from that knowledge base only the most relevant content. Because if we just pull some irrelevant content, the LLM would not be able to resolve all of the dependencies that it sees in the data, in the task that it's going to have. We also have to precisely craft the prompts. I mean that the tasks that are going to be described to the LLM, like not just you are a helpful AI assistant, but also you are an assistant. Here's the data. Look carefully at the data. Look if they are relevant, if they respond the user question. So we have to be really precise in what we are telling the LLM. But also we have to somehow manage the uncertainty. And as I have a nice history about that.
One question here.
Yeah.
These the precise prompt, etc. But these are from development perspective, not from end user, correct?
Okay. Yes, this is behind the scenes. We have to somehow behind the scenes instruct the LLM what we are going to do. What is the task? As an end user, we just provide a question, and there are a bunch of agents that are going to work on that question. One of them will work if that question is related to the history. The other will work if that question requires running an SQL query. The third one gets an answer from, for example, data warehouse and analyzes those queries. And the other one will somehow summarize the answer. So there are multiple LLM agents that are working on answering the user question. And all of the instructions are behind the scenes, behind the interface, but they have to be really carefully written so the LLM knows what to do.
Okay, so this is something that you're taking care of so that Mark from marketing does not need to know anything specific, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. But what I thought about that uncertainty, because the easiest way when the AI is not knowing the answer, it's just making up an answer. So we can instruct it. Okay, so if you are not sure, just say you don't know. But we have to somehow carefully manage the uncertainty and the possibilities that LLM have. And for example, while testing, I had a situation when I asked the LLM to answer some question with a SQL query. It says, I don't know, I should ask the database. So ask database. I don't have access to the database. Yes, you have. No, I don't. Yes, you have. And back and forth, back and forth. And after a few discussions, LLM was so sure that, yes, he can answer the database. So it just ran the query and turned the answer. But we cannot somehow go into the opposite side, because I also remember one situation when I asked also for the testing, when if that game was used within the last month, and it ran the query shows null, which means zero, nothing. So the LLM thought there is no evidence that the game hasn't been used, so I guess that it was used. So,
wow.
So we have to teach LLM, instruct it what the lack of the data could mean. It could also mean that the query was written in the wrong way, that there might be some issues with the data, but we will have to instruct the AI assistant that the lack of data might be good, but tell the users about the possibilities. Do not make up an answer. So it is a really, I would say, a really hard work to find the balance between that uncertainty and not making up any answers. But it can be adjusted with the prompts, with the carefully crafted prompts that LLM is going to follow.
Alrighty, how about that for a good moment to take a short break? So guys, today with Kasia, we've heard the story behind the Insight Assistant, the context. Now we know what problems can be solved with this AI tool, who'll benefit from it, what it takes to make it work, and what are the lessons learned from first implementations. Besides, Kasia, you didn't forget to call out how to deal with the LLM hallucinations. That's much appreciated. So that's going to be the end of this episode, and let's resume in 2 weeks' time with part 2, where we'll be discussing the differences between LLM engines, common misconceptions about AI agents, Kasia, your plans for the future, and I will also ask some provocative questions at the end, so please be prepared for that. And guys, I'm signing off for now, so remember, keep rolling with the data.